Recording in progress.
Okay, I am back in, and I got a record going on my desktop software here, so just in
Okay,
case.
that'll work. Yeah, that gives us a backup. Sometimes, as you know, Zoom is a little glitchy with recordings. We've had some problems with them in the past.
Oh,
Uh,
I know. It's Zoom is a weird program. It'll just steal all of your microphone and camera inputs. So if you try to use anything else, it's like, no, this is mine, and nothing else
yep,
can use it.
sort of like McAfee products.
Oh,
They just take over. Um, okay, well, I'm ready to get started if you are.
absolutely. I'm ready, Paul.
Okay, I'm talking with Shah here. This is Shah channel on YouTube. You find a link below for that. I was turned on to your work by Peter Wright some time ago and have really been enjoying it, especially the deeper digs that you've done into ideas of bride price and dowry and sort of what's happened in all of our societies, collective societies around marriage. So I guess a good place to start is the state of marriage today. Particularly, we're both in the West, so um, I would like just some of your general thoughts on where we're at with marriage. How well is that institution going? Uh,
Well, I guess to put it as concisely as possible, it is a very, very one-sided deal currently. I would say that. And a lot of what made marriage a good deal, especially for men, has kind of been removed from the deal as the states kind of taken it over or replaced it or created other legal structures around it in order to kind of devalue marriage. But marriage has been, God, hollowed out and neutered is really all I can think of to say there. And it's not even just my study of bride price and dowry, but I used to work at the child support agency here in Sacramento for 5 years, and I was a child support officer and a trainer, so I've read thousands of divorce orders probably and talked to a lot of people who used to be married and are now divorced, and saw a lot of how that stuff breaks up in the end. And it's little wonder to me why men are avoiding marriage more and more.
yeah, no kidding. It, I think it has to be mentioned also that, the romantic model of marriage, which is what most marriages in the West are now based on, is a sort of a newcomer on the block. It is a recent development in human history that we get married based on feelings rather than on practicality. I know that in the work that you covered on bride price and dowry, that those things were based on the relative value of the addition of who was being brought in to make the family. That if women's labor and women were scarcer at the time, part of
Mhm.
the idea being that whatever resource is scarce, you value more.
Mhm.
And so if women were more scarce, if their labor was more scarce, they would be valued more. But on the other hand, if men were the ones that bringing more value, then we end up with things like dowry, right? Did I capture that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summation of it. I'll expand into it a bit. Essentially, for most of human history, especially in pre-industrialized human history, pretty much most marriages, we're talking the vast majority here of marriages, except in maybe societies that don't even have property, very low complexity societies, there is some kind of transaction at the time of marriage. So the overall umbrella term is marriage transaction, and there are different kinds of marriage transactions. So there's the one I think most people are familiar with is called bride price. And that's like, oh, you trade cows for a woman. That's the sort of cartoonish understanding of it. Okay. Then there's dowry. And dowry is actually wealth that comes from the woman's family with her, uh, to the groom and to his side. So when they get married, she's bringing over a substantial amount of wealth that helps to start up the new household. It creates a conjugal fund. And the significant thing about this, and this is what I really think, I want people to remember this because there's a lot of mythology that's been created since romantic love took over. And one of that is that men are always supposed to provide everything all of the time, and that, women have no obligation here at all. but it's actually not true. And tradcons push this forward all the time, and it's not true for most of especially European and Western history, going all the way back. They've practiced dowries, and that money is crucial in setting up a new household, especially if you want couples to get married young. And just to give you some idea of how this works, out of about 1,200 pre-industrial societies that are studied, so this is called the Ethnographic Atlas, and a lot of scholars use this as a large data set in order to make determinations about this and how the economics work. Only about 4% of those practice dowry, but here's the caveat. Of that 4%, that comprises 70% of the world's population. So what that really means is in societies of higher complexity, where monogamy is the expectation and where private property is part of the package, dowry is the system that works to create a strong, healthy society. And so we can unpack that a little bit more. I know that it's a lot, but this has been going on for a long time. And to answer your initial question about romantic love, is that it's not until relatively recently, after industrialization and class mobility and a lot of these other very recent changes, that the dowry system was done away with.
Okay. And that brings to mind for me that it appeared you talked about tradcons. It seems to me that one, there is a real problem of ignorance of marital history in our society. Tradcons seem to speak as though their impressions of marriage historically were shaped by 1950s romantic movies. Uh, and that this they think is the true history of marriage. If you talk to most average people, they would probably tell you they think people have been marrying for love forever. That's always been the standard, but it absolutely hasn't.
That's exactly true, Paul. And that's the part that really blew my mind. I'll tell you, just I'm 34 now, and after college and about when I was 23, 24, I started reading a lot of great works of literature. And I'd come across like Dostoevsky and read The Brothers Karamazov or The Idiot. And somewhere in reading that, some of the central characters would be dealing with this thing called the dowry, and as they're dealing with marriages, a big factor in who characters are choosing to marry and why has to do with how many rubles of a dowry she's coming with. And when I first read that at 23, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I thought it's always the man's side that pays the woman's side. And that kind of stayed at the back of my mind for about a decade until I started seeing a lot of this rhetoric, especially in this space, whether it's from tradcons or even other folks in the manosphere that would profess men as, always, you gotta self-improve and make all this money and give women everything or you're not a real man, and masculinity is completely associated with that, and you better not ask her a penny. But yes, the thing that irks me about tradcons particularly is that they claim to be traditional and then they sell you a version of traditionalism, which is in fact not true. And the way marriages are actually supposed to be, paired up and matched together is based off economic output of both of the parties. So to give you an example, in bride price paying societies, typically, the woman actually contributes more labor to agriculture or raising animals or whatever it is. So that produces real income for her family, real income. So the justification for the bride price is when she's going to get married, the groom's family owes a compensation to the other side, to her family, because they're going to be taking her labors and income as part of their family conjugal, their family unit, basically. As agriculture develops and the plow comes on the scene. So before the plow, it's the hoe and what's called the digging stick. And both men and women can use
I'm
it.
sure that put a little different light on male labor at
Yeah,
the time.
exactly. So once the plow comes in, the plow is a very tough instrument to use. It takes a lot of upper body strength. You got to be able to push very hard. You got to control the animal. But the thing about the plow is it's way more efficient. So, a person with the plow can, take care of a large amount of land, and this produces a huge surplus of calories. So it pretty much becomes the domain of men's work, and women's contribution to that is very little, basically. So the economic output of a man becomes significantly more than what a woman can do, and this has huge reverberating effects. So what you see is a huge, explosion of calorie, basically. So there, population goes up, urban centers start to get developed. As you have all this extra food, you start to see stratification, specialization. And on the men's side, one of the major differences between the dowry paying society and a bride price is that bride price incomes for people tend to be around the same. When you look at a dowry complex society, which is plow agriculture, there's poor men, and then there's rich men, and there's men in the middle. There's a huge difference. But on the woman's side of this equation, their value that they offer economically stays pretty static. Because of that, it moves from bride price to dowry, basically, because in order to secure a base, I mean, I don't like to use this term high value male, but a high status male, let's say, there has to be some compensation between what she offers and what he's offering. So her family is very interested in getting her with someone who's either in her class or higher up. So that's going to lead to a dowry paying society. In bride price, which is less complex, you have less complex forms of agriculture. It's either based off, some kind of maybe animals and raising, or it's based off of very light agriculture, which, they can only take care of so much land and produce so many calories based off that. You see homogenous incomes. Basically, they're around the same for most people. So this also reflects in how dowry works too. You see a huge difference in dowry payments. In the upper classes, dowry payments are quite significant, and then it kind of gradates down, going all the way down, basically like that. So there's this just very obvious relation between how marriages are made traditionally and what both parties produce and what both parties bring to the table.
And are you saying that indirectly that the plow gave birth to hypergamy as we know it?
Yes, that is exactly what hypergamy is. I'm glad you pointed that out. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, you know, and it's also because of private property and wealth accumulation starts to happen because, with the plow, you can own so much more land, you can take care of so much more land. But it goes from these kind of communal living where all the animals graze on the communal tribal land or something like that. And it moves into this is my fenced off property, that's your fenced off property. And there has to be a mechanism for how that wealth is threaded through the generations. And this leads to class differentiation, and this does lead to hypergamy in the truest
Okay,
sense of the word of hypergamy.
that makes sense to me. I'm wondering, I mean, we've got a society now that it appears that romance has moved in and co-opted marriage
Hmm.
completely. It's co-opted the culture
Hmm.
in many ways, which has elevated women, regardless of socioeconomic status. It has elevated them to the role of almost royalty, there to be served.
Yeah.
It is men's job. And you mentioned this about the manosphere. I see this, and I see it. I'm going to say it in particular in the Black manosphere. I see the
Hmm.
most of it. If you look at Kevin Samuels' work and Mumia Obsidian Ali, who's a guy I like both of these guys.
Hmm.
God rest poor Kevin Samuels.
Hmm.
But there is a message there that the role of a man, if you want to succeed, is you must get on the hamster wheel and you must appeal to women's base instincts. And I think that fits in real well with the sort of matriarchal nature of Black society in America. Uh, and so it's an easier sell there. But it's basically what we're all being told is that women are elevated. We must get on the hamster wheel. We must succeed. We see all kinds of red pill content creators espousing that stuff. It seems rather blue pill to me. I just wonder what your impressions are of this sort of take of becoming a high value man so you can attract an allegedly high value woman.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the red pillars will correctly, criticize the gynocentrism inherent in tradcon, like the tradcon we know of today, and say they put women on a pedestal, but then simultaneously what they've kind of done is constructed another gynocentric sort of structure here where men are pressured more than ever before in order to match delusional expectations of women. And they're, if they, it could be misplaced evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology where they'll try to say, well, it's up to the man to provide everything. And they'll try to find these justifications for it. I'm basically just saying that's absolutely not true. And what they're really doing is putting a very unfair amount of pressure on men. And the truth is that optimally speaking, especially if you're looking at fertility and birth rates, you want couples to get married young, right? So that they can take full advantage of a fertility window. If you're putting this unfair expectation on a young man, and especially a young man specifically, and say, hey, you need to have this figured out by at least 25. I mean, at the latest, let's say, if not before, you need to figure out how to get the house, have a good job. She shouldn't have to worry about any finances, and that's what's going to justify marriage for you. It's going to be impossible for most men to achieve. And then if you look at the past, it's just simply not true. The way marriages, especially in European higher complexity, order societies through higher complex agriculture, private property, and with monogamy, that we're used to, because that's what they asked for. The tradcons are like, we want monogamy out of you. We don't want you out here, and we want you paying for everything. In order to do that, her side of this equation provides what's called a dowry, and that helps set up the household so that this couple can get married young. We do not see anything like that nowadays. Nowadays in our culture, it's, oh, you're 18, get out of the house and go figure it out. And then we're expecting young people. I say we've been spoiled, at least a couple generations before me. There's a very good economy. You can kick your kid out at 18 and they'd find a good job and probably be with it their whole life. And they'd be able to get a house and do all these things in the modern American TV dinner family that we all saw on TV. But nowadays it's different. It's gone back almost to how it used to be. A house where I live is going to be a little over $500,000 if you want one. And we have forgotten completely how families come together in order to accomplish these goals and to pass the torch on forward.
And in that light, I have to admit that as a boomer, I've been guilty a lot of this mentality of, just because you're right. I was raised in a world where, you're at 18, you're out, figure it out, get out, and you could.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's not the same world that we live in today. And the expectation of an 18-year-old guy going out in the world and being ready to buy a home by 21 is absolutely insane. It's not happening.
It's yeah, exactly. And the sad part is what I see is there's just this huge shaming of men, especially young men, and it really comes from both sides. I mean, it'll come from progressive feminist side, men aren't trying hard enough. It'll come from even the tradcon side. Well, you need to be working harder. You should just get a second job, which is funny because they're admitting it takes 2 incomes for a household. But yeah, just start working 16 hours a day.
Just lift, bro.
Yeah, just make sure you can deadlift 300 pounds, and stop complaining about it. I'm looking at this historically, and I'm saying men have never had, especially young men, this kind of pressure, and society recognized this, and they had systems in place in order to take care of this. I think another kind of fair question is how did we kind of end up in this place? And romantic love has a lot to do with it. And also as enabled by industrialization, because when industrialization comes on the fray, I mean, we get wealth being created in a way we've never seen before. We start to see class mobility. The printing press comes in. We start to see tales of romantic chivalry spreading like we've never seen before. And there's a huge cultural shift with that,
Absolutely. I was talking once with Warren Farrell about these young men, and you mentioned the shaming. It certainly comes out in the language of failure to launch.
Yes.
There is, you didn't do something right, you're failing, which is the message we send to young men. And I thought Warren very incisively called it unconscious wisdom that they weren't launching, that they were the sort of figuratively staying in the basement with their video games and refusing to get out in the world, refusing to leave home. They can't afford to leave home anymore, and we've absolutely saddled them with 1950s expectations in a 2020s world. It's not working out for them at all.
It
So
is. Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Please go on.
no, I was just going to say, so, how do you think we begin to correct this? We have allegedly a red pill community that I think
Mhm.
honestly makes it worse in a lot of ways. They all the biodeterminism, this is how men are not valuable. Your sperm can impregnate 1,000 women. Basically, you're disposable from the beginning. We send them this kind of messaging, and then we basically reduce them to biological elements and tell them it's just their lot in life to sink or swim. No compassion, no support from the society whatsoever. We've totally abandoned them. What if you're a young man, if you're talking to a much younger man in his early
Mhm.
20s, what do you tell him about the world he lives in?
You know, and just right off rip, and I know a lot of people probably wouldn't like to hear this, but the fact is I think our understanding of masculinity and how masculinity works and what it is has been kind of thwarted or hijacked by a lot of different groups. And what I mean by that is it's like, especially when it comes, it's like we live in a world where women take half of the employment opportunities from men, right? If men are expected to be providers and they're competing in the same job market as women for the same jobs, who are oftentimes even chosen over the men um, for those jobs, it's just not. It's unconscionable, and it seems backwards to me to shame men for expecting women to bring some kind of wealth with them. They always did it before, especially with the dowry, and I'm localizing this especially to Western history, and this goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, the Israelites, Sumer, Egypt. All of these places changed from bride price to dowry once they discovered the plow. And then this is in Greek, in the Athens. This carries over all even throughout United Christendom as they go and they push out the Germanic tribes slowly but surely. They move from bride price to adopt a dowry system as things begin to urbanize and complexity begins to be achieved. Private property, a single family unit. Just and not even from the dowry, just working at child support. Me specifically, I'm not against marriage, but you have to really negotiate the deal that you're signing up for. Men men nowadays, just I don't get it. They make fun of women for giving up the milk or the whole cow or whatever, whatever. Yeah, you can get laid. But then on the other side, when it comes to marriage, men make the exact same mistake. I just don't see how you can have an NFL player who gets married to basically a woman with her hand out. She comes, her father gave her nothing, her mother gave her nothing, her brother gives her nothing to go to a marriage. She's earned nothing, she's kept nothing from her career to come into this marriage with. And then some guy over here who's worked hard for his wealth gets married. And I mean, a whole other conversation is how bad the marriage laws are, but let's just say it's essentially 50-50, for getting paternity fraud and custody and all these other kinds of battles. But what they'll do is just take this really bad deal, and somehow the women have the guys convinced that, well, just, they birth the babies, and therefore, the wife of a normal guy down here who works a normal job gets 50-50, and the wife of an NFL player gets 50-50. It really doesn't make any economic sense. So when I talk to men, I would say don't be ashamed of requiring that a woman you're going to have an actual long-term joint enterprise situation with, that you require her to bring something with her. And especially with men and women getting married around 30 these days, it's like I don't see why men don't look at women and say, what have you been doing from 18 to 28? You went to college. Okay, you spent
They don't want to know.
yeah, you went to exactly. There's that. You went to college, you've been working, and now you're coming to me and saying you want to be a traditional wife, and you have nothing to bring with you for this joint, what's essentially going to be $1 million enterprise. $500,000 house with 2 kids, on average about 250,000 a kid to raise from 0 to 18. Okay? We're talking about $1 million enterprise here, and you're wanting to do this, and you have no preparation for this. So when it comes to men, I think men are doing what's natural in a situation like this, which is the unconscious wisdom you brought up earlier, which is, well, I'm just going to avoid this, because it's really self-preservation in a very harsh environment. What I think men need to
It's
do.
hard to understand why they haven't adapted, though.
Mhm.
As you were speaking about this, one of the things that came to mind for me was that, women, feminists in particular, have moaned and gnashed teeth about the alleged wage gap
Yeah.
for decades now. And one of the retorts that we give them out of the red pill community is about men's ability to negotiate for better jobs, for better salaries, and that they perform much better than women at that.
Yeah.
Yet when we turn around and it comes to marriage, men don't negotiate anything. All
It,
they try to do is prove what they bring to the table and ask for nothing in return except maybe her approval. And I wonder what it is about us. I think the romantic model has come in and distorted things in that way, but there's got to be other factors that have left men in such sorry shape when it comes to negotiating a marriage.
that is a fantastic question and a fantastic observation, if I may say. Men pride themselves on being, these expert negotiators, but then when it comes to marriage, they literally shoot themselves in the foot. And just what, romantic engagements, all the time. I think a lot of it is being raised on the culture that we grew up in, and what you can say partly is romantic culture. A lot of it, I think, aside from romantic culture, is just shaming from whatever ideas of masculinity we have, right? Because it's, sometimes I wonder who is the greater enemy of men. Who does more harm to men? I even hate to use that word, enemy. Is it women or is it other men? There seems to be this hyper competitiveness amongst men, where it's like, let me pull up the ladder behind me, and people think they're winning, but actually everybody just loses collectively, because the more of these top guys just take advantage of a, I like to separate it from short term to long term. So the red pill guys would be like, if you just lift, bro, then everything's going to be okay. Well, it's like, yeah, you'll find people who want to lie down with you for some amount of time. But if you're talking about marriage and a long term thing where you have to leverage yourself and turn your back, basically, uh, deadlifting 300 pounds isn't going to help you. Bench pressing 250 or whatever your goal is isn't going to help you, even if it gets you some attention from women. You're still a big fish to fry, no matter how much money you have. So part of this problem is the guys at the top don't even know what they're doing. They don't know how to negotiate properly. And if they did, see, dowry is actually an interesting system because it gives the guys at the top of a ladder a rational reason to be monogamous. Essentially, they're basically, the other side here is trying to get this guy to basically put his resources into one woman. And that guy is at the top. He can have multiple women if he wants. But with the dowry offer, that makes a lot of sense. It becomes rational. His father is going to say to him and say, listen, son, um, that is a very good deal. And you should definitely take this. This is a good deal. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're not pursuing marriage for any kind of good reason. It's just for folly. And that's really how they kind of differentiate it. But I think this culture of masculine shaming, I mean, we have a wrong idea of what traditionalism is right off the top.
Right.
So men are kind of injected with that propaganda. Then I think we have an incorrect idea of what masculinity is. And I think the more desperate men get, the more they try to lean into this idea of what masculinity is, and I call it the barbification of men. It's where, like, you have this very high beauty standard for women, and these sort of high value male, influencer content creators are kind of the equivalent of the Barbie there. And all they're doing is they're going to lead to an implosion of the understanding of masculinity as we have it now, because most men won't be able to achieve that. So if the guys at the top were able to negotiate good deals, and as it comes down, this would create matching for everybody that makes sense, right? So they need to be leashed and wrestled back down is what needs to happen.
But the guys at the top don't make good deals. This is why you get Elon Musk with Amber Heard for a while.
Exactly.
Is
Tyrese Gibson, more
yes.
recently, Brad Pitt had a rough time. Tom Brady I mean, we can sit here and list them off all day. And that's the thing I've tried to point out. And I first realized that while working at child support because, I'd see so many things cross my desk and I'd see the amounts of child support. I'd see the amount of alimony. I'd see how much they were making. It was my job to calculate it. And just me as a guy working there, I'm like, man, society is going to punish me for the more successful I'm going to be. I don't even really feel like being successful. I just want to live a peaceful enough life, to be honest. And that's the part that really annoys me. So, a guy makes it somewhere, then what he does is he takes the stupidest deal of his life and he thinks that's what he's supposed to be doing. He doesn't. Part of the problem is I think men don't feel like men if they negotiate for themselves on this side. And the only reason I'm digging into all this history on the dowry and all these academic papers is because I'm trying to remind men of a lost leverage that we used to have, of a lost negotiating tool within our arsenal that we used to have. And that does not make you feminine by expecting the woman to bring something into this equation. And the other fact is, it's just like, well, listen, if that marriage goes bust, which frankly it probably has a high chance of, especially in the world that we live in, at least the separation's not going to be as painful. And if you can't find someone like that, well, then it's not worth getting married until you find a deal that makes sense.
Well, we talk about, you mentioned before, and I'm going to get back to this idea of the perceived value of men's labor
Hmm.
and how that changed with the plow.
Hmm.
Did it also change more with the Industrial Revolution? It would
Yes,
seem like that was like the plow on crack.
that's exactly what happened. The Industrial Revolution creates it takes that heterogeneity on the men's side especially, and it really stretches it out. And this was even, you can say, one of the things that made the dowry system kind of fall apart in the end, because not only do you get men making a lot more money, you get men of different class statuses able to make a lot more money than they ever did before. So, when the dowry system worked at its finest, you had men here, men here, men here, and that's all based on land owned. Richer families tie in with other richer families, and they want to keep property up there and all these kinds of things. So, depending on what class you're in, and it's very easy to tell what your life sort of arc's going to be here in terms of wealth, whether it's from inheritance or from your income producing capacities. And this matches you with an appropriate dowry in your class, and that keeps things going. Once the Industrial Revolution happens, and you start to see class mobility, especially as different types of jobs and specializations open up, and this is how you get into education and everybody wanting a college degree. The perceived value of what someone thinks they're worth on the marriage market, they say, "Well, I have an education now. I got this good job. Um, I want a higher dowry amount," and this leads to problems on that side. Now, and then past that, you almost get this kind of peasant revolt. You get these revolutions and all these kinds of things. And we have a more, I guess you can say, egalitarian society in terms of women working, people from whatever class or background being able to participate in whatever kind of business um, that they like. And not only just that, but there's the dovetailing of romantic love in this, right? Because if you go to you go to college, you get this education, you can now be class mobile. You're not very dependent on your family's wealth so much. The entire family unit, and you thinking about your inheritance and these kinds of things, you can say, screw you, mom and dad, I'm in love, and we got enough money to rent an apartment in this mega urban civilization that never existed before, because we were hoping we'd get something from you guys in order to establish a new household. So then
Yeah.
they give the finger to their parents, then the parents kind of give the finger back and say, all right, you're 18, get out of here, go do that. And that is exactly what happened. So not only is it just this divide on steroids, it's also class mobility wrapped up into all that. So that then makes it hard to determine what is an appropriate dowry amount, because everyone's trying to get as much as they can.
And then you enter the romantic model into that, and it becomes, how do you negotiate with a deity? If a woman is elevated this far above a man in status simply by her existence,
Hmm.
nothing to do with what she brings to a marriage or what her family brings, but her mere existence places her over him and puts him in a servile role, how do you negotiate?
That's a great question. I think what we're doing now, and what men are doing now, especially with the marriage strike, and this kind of thing, at least makes it so women on the other side feel a little bit of that pain, you know. And I think as the economy, because we're, in my opinion, we're kind of, listen, I don't know what Trump's going to do. I choose to remain positive about Trump. Maybe he can turn this ship into a direction that makes sense and reach a new golden age for the U.S. in terms of money and dominance. My guess is, though, is that we're leaving, you know, it looks like we're leaving a golden age into much tougher economic times. The families that are going to be able to survive these economic times, I think, are going to adopt, maybe not bring it back completely, but have some semblance of this kind of negotiation in terms of pairing up, you know. Because then when you have a woman, whether it's her own wealth or at least especially her family's wealth, you know, like I can give you an example. If tradcons really wanted to be somewhat traditional instead of what they do today, what they can say is when their daughter turns, you know, 18, they can say, you know, I saved up about $180,000 for your college tuition throughout your life, if you're a responsible parents to this young woman. Um, let's sit down and think about that for a minute. You know, like, we could use that towards your marriage, or we can use that to put you through college. You know, what do you want to do? On the other side, here's a nice, you know, 23-year-old. He just finished his degree in electrical engineering. You know, seems like a decent guy. You know, his prognosis for income is pretty high. If you want to be a stay-at-home mom, we can help in setting up the household and maybe offer this as some kind of a tool for negotiation. But that doesn't exist at all anywhere. It's
Oh,
just this person's a princess. If we're going to use these terms like princess and treat me like a queen, and you look at the kind of dowries queens actually brought to kings, some of these queens saved entire kingdoms. I mean, the entire English empire, through their dominance through trade routes, came from one queen bringing over certain trade routes. I think it was from Portugal and Bombay and I think Tangiers and some other areas, and really set them up to be what they were going, you know, to become. And instead, nowadays, you hear this kind of weird sort of, you know, treat me like a queen kind of talk. And it's just like, what do you bring with you? And the answer's nothing. But to go more to your point, I think what you're saying is, like, how do you negotiate with someone who is essentially, you know, irrational and not willing to listen? And in that case, all I can say is I don't think you can, truthfully. All I think is what you can do is protect yourself, wait and see if there's an opening for a deal, because I think there will be people maybe coming up as they're dealing with harder economic times that might be more willing to take something. The other X
I,
factor is just how bad the family law system is. But if I can get something on the front end, I might at least take the risk of dealing with the family law system.
and you know, you mentioned the marriage strike. I'm just curious as to your thoughts as the end game of that. Let's say, for some unspeakable reason, this really catches on with young men. I mean, there's certainly a lot of indications that younger men are looking at marriage with a very skeptical eye.
Yeah,
But let's say this actually became a movement, and men in mass just said, "We're not doing it
yeah,
anymore. We're not getting married under these terms."
yeah.
What happens then?
Well, I think it's almost like a game of chicken, and it's like who collapses first. You know what I mean? In terms of if it's men, women, or if it's the governing body up ahead that wants us to reproduce. Elon Musk goes on Twitter every week complaining about this. I think what happens is, unfortunately, it's just going to lead to, like, I think it's the right thing to do. Just off rip right there, because the deal is so bad. If they do want this, they have to think about how to renegotiate this. And what you're seeing right now is they're just trying to shame men into doing this. My personal opinion about marriage as an institution is that it's already been neutered. And the reason I say that is because with kids being born out of wedlock, they what men used to get out of the marriage contract was you got paternity rights over your kids, and no, you know, it was very hard to challenge that. That was a positive for us, right? This is before
Right.
genetic tests, in all this kind of thing, and then, you know, so when it comes to custody, you get that, you know, this person's your wife. There's at fault divorce. It's hard for them to leave you, and you have certain rights there. At this point, especially with no fault divorce gets rid of that. You have a completely new paternity structure that exists outside of marriage, and that's in the form of what's called the voluntary declaration of paternity. Um, you can get paternity for your child right at the hospital by signing a document. So why do I need to get married if I'm worried about paternity when I could just do it by signing it? And in fact, it's better for me to just sign, because if I get married, I'm giving a sustained assent to any issue of my wife as my child. And then if I find out when the kid's 5, too bad, you're on child support. That used to happen all the time in California. So on the one hand, men should avoid marriage, and I think men have other tools in order to kind of leverage something out of women if they want. You know, you can be my girlfriend, maybe we can have a kid together, depending on how I view this negotiation or deal. I can get paternity of the kid by signing it, signing a paternity declaration at the hospital. And, as long as we're living together, that ensures my custody rights because the child has a relationship with me. So I at least have a viable case to fight for custody, even though that
Right.
still might be hard. So when I look at where this marriage thing is going, I think it's becoming an outdated sort of institution provided to us, at least by the state. I know there's a religious aspect to this, but I think people can get covenant marriages outside of the state's contract. So I think once people kind of find new ways to survive this or negotiate under this, maybe things will turn around and you will hear more of a voice to get some of this stuff reformed. That's what I'm hoping for, that this leads to, that it leads to some sort of actual legal change once we see how different the culture is becoming and how bad of a deal it is for men.
There are guys in I say our community, I use that term loosely,
Mhm.
but there are guys in our community that somehow see technology as going to be a saving grace in this, that will have artificial wombs and uh, we can father children that way. What's your take
You
on
know, I
all that?
on my channel, I always call technology the X factor. And really, all of these changes in society have been brought on by increases in technology that have democratized certain things. You know, you can say even romantic love was democratized from a courtly love into the hands of most people, and higher, standards of living and all that kind of thing. I think in the society we live in, it's it's very hard because there are these other kinds of options and there are these different technologies, and we have become so individualistic that the idea of just two people living together seems impossible, or that it's going to lead to some sort of breakup inevitably. So people want to live by themselves. I saw this thing recently called living apart together, which is like a relationship style where people kind of, they might even be married, but they live in like two separate households, or they design a house to where there's a wing over here for the husband and there's one for for the woman. So I think all these things will serve to make the sort of dynamic between men and women in terms of how close we need to be together, maybe not as necessary as it used to be. And I'm sure a tradcon hearing that does not like the sound of that, because that doesn't sound like biblical patriarchy to them at all. But
Well,
with tech,
they don't live by biblical patriarchy either. They live by the romantic model, which has nothing to do with biblical patriarchy.
if anything, that's goddess worship to some level. You can even stretch it that way. That's a good point.
Yep,
There's another thing about that. Sorry to kind of drift off topic there, but
that's all right.
is you know when it comes to the men's space, for instance, and I'm very happy to be talking to you because you're someone who's really watched this grow from the beginning. You're one of the originators. That's how I see you. And it's like, on the one hand, it seems like there's been so many people who've hijacked this space. There's another content creator I really like. His name's Coach Greg Adams, and he made a stream with a scathing critique of the red pill and the manosphere. And he talks about these different groups. He says it starts with MRA, then there's the pickup guys, and there's other ones here and MGTOW. I kind of go from pickup guys to these kind of self-improvement alpha simps, I like to call them, who play into gynocentric ideals by telling you to self-improve to a delusional level.
Right.
And what I keep seeing is like, working at child support, I'm very much focused on men's rights, and because I don't care if a guy is up here or down here. I think men are affected equally by the laws that we currently have. So we need to work on some collective level to change these. But it just seems like there's been hijacking after hijacking after hijacking of the space. And I'm very interested actually in maybe hearing from you, like, how you see the evolution of the space. What do you think men should do? Where do you think the space is going?
I think it's impossible to determine because when you say the space, actually talking about several different competing ideologies. I mean, you have the sort of MGTOW space that are guys that are, and I'm not talking about the self-improvement fanatics of just lift bro, but
Mhm.
guys that are actually dedicated to the quality of their own lives and doing that aside from women and either pushing women out of the picture altogether or including them in some limited degree, but keeping the focus on their own lives. Then you've got religious red pill guys out there preaching the exact opposite. They're gynocentric. They talk about traditions, and to which my question is, which tradition?
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Which
they're
interpretation? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the gynocentrist or the tradcon interpretation of tradition is like a 1950s romantic movie. They just have no idea that there was tens of thousands of years of history of bride price and dowry that went
Hmm.
on before their recent Johnny come lately tradition.
Yeah.
And those two groups would be in total conflict with each other, yet they're considered generally part of the same online community. So where it goes, uh, it's a roulette wheel.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing,
Go ahead.
it's funny because I look at tradcons as another group that have completely hijacked the space. I see the space as this kind of organic creation of the frustrations of men helping each other. And as they became more powerful, it's like the sort of dominant either conservatism or whatever it is had to find a way to get a handle on these folks. And I think they've kind of successfully done that. The part that I feel like is kind of the differentiating factor here is a lot of the efforts I think of men's rights individuals have been thwarted by accusations of male supremacy. So it's like on the one hand, I think if you're a viewer of this space, if it's being hijacked by quote unquote tradcons who want a biblical patriarchy encoded in the law, progressives and women on the other side, what they see is, oh, this is a male supremacy movement, and in my opinion, that pushes the movement back. On the other end, I think I don't know if this is accurate to say, maybe you can correct me, but there's men's rights guys who are just looking at the situation and it's like, okay, what can we change to at least make this fair between men and women given the conditions that we have now? And I think that particular divide right there is one of the things we need to focus on because okay, if you're going to go this way, it's like what are we lobbying for? What is it that we're trying to change? What are we advocating for now is what I try to think about.
That's, I think, another one of the bifurcations. There's a split camp there between MGTOW and MRAs. MGTOW's impression will often be they criticize MRAs, saying that we're trying to make it safe to get back on the plantation. Uh, uh, when that is absolutely your description of what MRAs, I think, more generally do is a lot more accurate. But we're looking at what laws can you fix
Hmm.
to remove as much risk as possible from people's lives, and but it's a failed effort. I mean, that's another one of the MGTOW criticisms of MRAs. That's true. We're not seeing any change in law. And then you have the other problem there that once you change law, there have been states that have adopted more shared parenting friendly statutes into their family courts. And guys still get screwed over in those courts. Nothing changes. You change things on paper. We still live in a romantically gynocentric society that sees women as untouchable, and indeed doesn't think that we have a right to ask them to bring anything to their marriages other than themselves. So
Just
I think it's kind of a mess. I mean, I hate to say this. I wish after all these years of advocating for changes and advocating for men that I could say we've made progress. But I've got to say, I think the only real progress that's been made is men checking out.
I completely agree with you on that. Sometimes I do my streams every week, and the guys that are in there, we constantly look at this stuff and we keep falling back on it. Seems MGTOW is the most effective. The only time society decides to respond or start figuring out what's going on with men, as their mental health is when men are checking out or just walking away, basically. the marriage strike or whatever. So it's funny because the other models that are presented to us are shaming us into basically playing into a gynocentric model, providing everything, work hard. Charlie Kirk, I think, was the most recent guy that came out shaming men, and you better not even do anything fun for your, or you better not buy yourself a single thing until every single, financial thing for your wife or whatever she demands is is taken care of. So what you're saying, I think, is true, and it's very hard to argue. I do want to remain positive that there can be, some legal changes or at least some kind of changes to the deal. And in order to do that, I think men need leverage. The walking away is something that creates leverage, and how men negotiate with the resources they have is another thing that needs leverage. One, sorry, do you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to point out that, and I've long held this belief, 99+% of the issues that we would call men's rights issues can be ameliorated with better decisions about women.
Yes.
I mean, and it's where we really have to put the onus on guys. We wonder where all this is going. Well, men are moving away from marriage. They're moving very slowly away from gynocentrism. They're starting to challenge that in more circles, but we're talking about 100-year phenomena here, at least, but before there's any substantial change. But men can take care of their problems by not creating their problems. Men rush into marriages. They have low expectations of women, which are met
Many times over.
many times over. They expect to get screwed over, and they're not disappointed. This is, I've seen Tucker Carlson get on TV with Helen Smith some years ago and literally say that's men's job, is to take being screwed. That's what we're supposed to do, is
Men
to
are
take the raw
disposable.
deal.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Men are
they're
just a
disposable.
utility object to be used. Um,
And that's what religious tradcons really believe, which is my big idea, my big problem with them being even counted in the red pill community is that they're not red pill. They're very blue pill. They're very gynocentric. They're very woman centric, and they're very sacrificial. Their value of men is almost nil. We are there to serve and be used and be ridden like show ponies or like pack mules, and then to be disposed of. And that's their ethos still.
yeah, and what's insane about that is looking in the past that that's not even true. And I don't even mean in some primitive society that people aren't looking at the same way or a different culture. I'm talking about under Christian Europe, quite literally, all the way through until relatively very recently. Even in the US, there was dowry practice. I mean, the way the crown got women to come to the New World was to pay their dowries for them and say, here's a dowry. If you go out this way, then you can get married. There were, women that didn't have a dowry couldn't even get married. They might join a convent, which still cost money, but it was cheaper. Then there was another lane for them that might start with the word P if they couldn't figure out anything else. But dowry and all these kinds of things, in my opinion, especially if you want monogamy, the reason I look at the tradcons as the most sort of hypocritical here is because they want marriage with no divorce. Ironically, they do nothing to help with the laws there, but that's what
Right.
they advertise as wanting. They expect the guy to be monogamous, even if it's a dead bedroom situation ends up in all these kinds of other pitfalls of that kind of situation.
Just
Um,
man up and marry the hoe.
exactly, just man up and marry them. They're reformed now, whatever. But then there is really no expectation on the woman. That's nothing. I call them cosplayers. Is kind of my name for them. They're cosplaying as traditional, and it's really this sort of conditional traditional where one foot in, one foot out, and when it's convenient, I do this. When it's convenient, I do that. And tradcons are just married to this idea, and I really think it is because they're blue pilled. I mean, their idea of masculinity rests on that. It doesn't even match historically how Europe, Christian Europe, operated. I think a lot of it has to do with, frankly, the church being pushed out from the dominant sort of state religion, and it started off as a sect. There's a great book by Jack Goody, and a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about for bride wealth and dowry comes from another book, co-authored by Jack Goody and S.J. Tambia. But he wrote another book called The Development of Marriage and Family in Europe, and he discusses sort of the church's involvement in this from in the beginning when it's a sect, and how it moves into the official religion, and then what happens is it's pushed out as this state religion because now in the society we live in it doesn't have the same power it used to have. So tradcons, I guess, are in this position where they either have to somehow appeal to women or talk about servant leadership or whatever it is they do to try to survive in this kind of marketplace where they're in now, basically. And at first I think it's like, why aren't churches raising money to lobby for changing these laws? Then I learned something like, well, most church donations, at least a lot of them come from women. And it's just
Well,
like,
or from the men attached to those women. Make no mistake, I can
yeah,
say this as a Christian Protestant. I can tell you, and the Catholics are no exception, women run the church. And
yeah.
you're never gonna see a pastor uh, preach about reforming family law
Hmm.
in a church in the Western world. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably, escorted off the altar or wherever immediately, the diocese, wherever they're standing on, and
Well,
that'll
that's
be the
if the
last you
women
heard
in
of
the
them.
congregation didn't grab them and nail them to a tree.
Exactly, and rip them apart first. The other thing if you'd allow, I can share my screen, and I got a few screenshots from some of these papers because I've made a lot of big claims, and I do want to show that these are written into our academic journals here.
Show them away.
So I'll try to be as fast as I can about this. Zoom is not my specialty here, so let me go ahead and share that. So here is this is for the claim of the 70% of the world's population. So it says, and this is from a paper called The Economics of Dowry and Bride Price. Most societies at some point in their history have been characterized by payments at the time of marriage. So that's a claim I made, and this is true because we see it in what's called the World Ethnographic Atlas. Um, Such payments typically go hand in hand with marriages arranged by the parents of their respective spouses. These marriage payments come in various forms and sizes, but can be classified into two broad categories: transfers from the family of the bride to that of the groom, broadly termed as dowry, or from the groom side to the bride's, broadly termed as bride price. Bride price occurs in 2/3 of societies recorded in Murdoch's World Ethnographic Atlas of 1167 pre-industrialized societies. So bride price occurs for 2/3 of them. But here's the kicker. Conversely, dowry occurs in less than 4% of the sample. However, in terms of population numbers, dowry has played a more significant role because the convention of dowry has occurred mainly in Europe and Asia, where more than 70% of the world's population arises. So I saw that in two separate places, but I just wanted to put that out, and then I want to show you the agriculture connection in terms of how tools kind of play into this. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen one more time.
Sure.
And share. Bride price paying societies have also been associated with the strong female role in agriculture. Bosrup, in particular, has argued that bride price is found in societies in which agriculture relies on light tools, such as the hoe, and thus where women are actively engaged. In contrast, she argues dowry is more common in heavy plow agriculture where the role for women is limited. This connection seems supported by the occurrence of bride price in sub-Saharan Africa and China, where women's participation in agriculture is relatively high. The reemergence of dowry in medieval Europe also corresponded to a period of economic expansion coinciding with the introduction of heavier plow agriculture technology. In turn, this technology led to greater productivity, more surplus for trade, growth in commerce, and a rise of towns, of which have been argued to increase the amount of household-bound activity for women. So that's just some of the stuff I wanted to show you there. There's a couple places that basically say the exact same thing, and I got a ton of stuff here. I don't want to turn it into a college lecture, but there's even charts showing how much the typical dowry was going through history for a lot of these
Oh,
societies. I mean,
wow.
yeah, some of this stuff, it's like you'll get several years worth of income. Some people it'll be a whole house. Some people it's it's a significant amount of money to start the household. Some people, it's even like 10 years of income, which is crazy. Some dowries are paid out at the marriage. Some are paid as time goes on to kind of ensure things work out as they're supposed to. A lot of the bigger ones are like that. And the most important thing to know is that there is an economics that governs how marriages are supposed to happen. And these marriages occur following these economic rules, and how they do that leads to how healthy the society is, and that depends, on the economics and a lot of that stuff. When it comes to dowry, that model requires some kind of income heterogeneity, especially on the men's side. Okay, so there's differences in income. Bride price, which is seen as you could say more primitive, less complex if you want to use that word. There isn't that big difference of income inequality there. So in a world where the men have income heterogeneity and the women are kind of serving the same purpose, that means their economic value is the same across the board. That leads to a dowry kind of situation.
Okay.
In our society, we have women with income heterogeneity as well now, since they're taking half the jobs. So does a marriage transaction need to happen? Well, I guess if you're asking to be a stay-at-home mom, maybe. But if both parties are working, then both parties need to match this economic model and keep it consistent. They should be matching something or bringing something into the marriage to create the household and to keep it sustained.
Well, I'm sorry, you've just lost all the tradcons in the audience.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and this is where I see the real split in the road going in the future of the manosphere. The tradcons, and I get that the religious belief is there, you know what I mean, and I understand that, albeit as gynocentric and blue-pilled as they are. They're advocating for something that I don't know will be able to convince most of the voters here or the people in a secular society. I mean, if there's a religious revival, it could happen. 95% of the people tomorrow could become, one religion and change the Constitution. I don't know how likely that is, but maybe it can happen. Maybe that's a generational thing. But if it's short of that, we're living in a world where, women have the right to vote, women have the right to employment and all these kinds of things. And if you, depending on who the manosphere supports, either this gets labeled as a male supremacy group or it gets labeled as a group fighting for equality for men, or at least some kind of fairness when it comes to this family deal for men to hopefully get things going.
Well, to this gynocentric society, those are one and the same. If you're fighting for some sort of parity for men, some sort of equal treatment under the law, then you are by definition misogynistic and a male supremacist. That's what the media will label you as. I think it's, going to what you also said about perhaps a religious revival. The problem is that even, and I've talked to a lot of these guys. I did a show with Pearl with Andrew and Tim on there. I've talked to other people in this community, is that the marriage that they promote has nothing to do with the marriage that's in the Bible. So you can have a religious, these guys, if you hear them talk about their wives not working and their wives being taken care of and dedicated to just taking care of children or just taking care of the home, they haven't read Proverbs 31, which is the most descriptive outline of what a Christian wife should be.
Yeah.
Available in the Bible, and it's nothing like what these guys are promoting.
Yeah, and it's funny too because they advocate for the stay-at-home wife deal here. They want people to get married young. It's just none of what they just don't understand that the economics and especially the stuff they're advising men to do does not support that. And it's like, okay, it's just if some guy says, this is what it should be, my question to that is how much have you saved for your daughter's dowry? And if the answer is nothing, it's just like you don't need to have it. All right, that's the end of what you're saying basically. You're not even doing this the way it's supposed to be done.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's the trouble I see. And then what I see is, I guess, two things. There's a split here in terms of men as a cohort of voters, and I think if the main political groups ever get wise, they can try to appeal to this cohort, especially after this last election. Trump went on Joe Rogan, Trump was on Aiden Ross, and he caught the attention of a lot of young men. He came off as authentic. A lot of people blame the quote unquote manosphere for his win, and I want to separate that term manosphere. Not I don't even just mean the red pill. I mean like Joe Rogan and these guys, people who probably wouldn't even call themselves red pill.
Well, they're being called manosphere now, so
Yeah, because they want to
it's fair
demonize
to,
them, basically.
yes.
But I think if tradcons continue to kind of be a stumbling block here that doesn't allow things to change, if the other side grows up or is smart enough one day to figure out, hey, we can attack this cohort of men by offering some kind of platform, then they can steal votes that way if they decide to do that. If they recognize men as a true voting bloc that we need to cater to somehow. The other thing that I think is good is, Trump mentioned his Bill of Rights. I'll be honest, I'm not even that hopeful that there will be too much change in this term with family law and these kinds of things. And prior to the election, I wasn't, because I didn't hear no mention of it. Still seemed like the same old, same old. I do like his idea of the digital Bill of Rights. I think if men are seen as a kind of voting bloc, and we can at least be on here talking without getting banned all the time, then quite possibly, this could, maybe turn into something that helps the situation. But so far, tradcons just seem to want to come off in the worst way possible, and they don't want to help.
Yeah, I mean, and we could get into, I mean, you could pick apart the psychology of this and come up, I think, with some pretty interesting conversations, but I don't know if I want to dissect the average tradcon's
Yeah.
mind right now. It's sort of old hat to me, but I do want to move forward.
Mm.
Invariably, we'll end up on politics.
Uh-huh.
And I did want to talk to you about the election, the consequences thereof, and what's sort of going on, and especially in light of the fact that the media seems to be trying to make the case that Joe Rogan and Elon Musk or these other podcasters anyway are the manosphere.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was to demonize them by calling them the manosphere, but what they did was probably just legitimize the manosphere
Yes,
more
exactly.
by connecting them to Rogan and other greats doing podcasts in this industry. But I wanted to ask you, just in general, your thoughts on the election, on Trump and policy,
Mhm.
where the world is going now, because there has been a tectonic shift. I mean,
Yes.
you can feel the difference, and it happened seemingly overnight. I know there's a lot of deception. There was a lot of pent up energy waiting to be let out, and when the election happened, here it came.
Yeah.
But man, what a transformation we've seen.
Yeah, I tend to be conflicted about it. On the one part, I do feel exactly what you're talking about. On the other part, sometimes I feel like the media is so good at making this seem like the most important election that you'll ever see, and that's part of the views, the clicks, that's part of the whole thing. Now, that being said, I do believe, it was an important election. And I'll be honest, I was advocating for people to not vote. My hope was family law as a wedge issue would put the fear of God into these people and say, oh my God, they're not going to vote for us, we better do something for them. It didn't turn out that way. But when I look at Trump's policies, I I'll be honest too, like I voted for Trump twice, and voting for Trump in 2016 was not as easy as it is voting for Trump this last time around. And I think I really, I think he means well. I think he's, especially back then, he appeals kind of on a populist level. Now it seems like, these kind of techno oligarchs are in his ear a little bit. But regardless of that, I still think he's trying to change things. I won't be entirely convinced until I see, family law and these kinds of things at least talked about. I think the closest thing he's mentioned to fertility is helping women get IVF treatment or something like that. Okay, fine, I get it. And he's got a tough game to be up there. The other aspect of this is, when the situation's so bad, people tend to just say, all right, I'm going to vote for the other guy. And, Biden and what Kamala did really just helped to make the situation just worse on so many levels. He wasn't all the way there. The events geopolitically in the world are just looking way more disordered. um, you know, and so it's just like, well, give the other guy a shot, hope for the best. I mean, he says some things that really appeals. I choose to be positive about it. I think he's going to do some good things. I want him to do some good things. I hope the economy turns around and all these kinds of things. But if we don't get certain problems figured out, especially for young men, then I think young men will be susceptible to voting for whoever is going to offer them something, or just not voting at all and leaving. So there is something palpable in the air as far as a change is concerned. And, there's a pushback on all this DEI stuff. People are annoyed by that. Um, and, the funny split was between, Elon and Vivek and the rest of MAGA when it came to the H-1B debacle there. But
Yep.
a lot of this depends on economics and competitiveness and how people's average everyday life is going to be depending on the policies that they put down.
I wish I could disagree with a lot of what you're saying. Unfortunately, I can't. I don't buy that Zuckerberg has suddenly found free speech and religion and valuing masculinity in the workplace. I I'm almost like, man, is this? Did somebody stick a quarter in this
Yeah.
guy's ear to get him to spout off a couple of things? A lot of it seems to be just sort of falling in place with the election results.
hmm
How long is it going to be before that starts dissipating?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, there's a lot of celebration, amongst manosphere creators, like, we did this, we helped for this. I kind of saw it as almost like, well, this almost completes sort of the conservative control over what the manosphere is. I value the diversity of thought that is in the manosphere. I don't want to see big money come in and try to control it, however it can. On the other side of this equation is the Democrats in that party. They lost big time. Everything they did was bad, especially Kamala. And it's like they're over there and they got a good butt whipping, and I just can't help but think, like, what, Trump can't run again. I don't know, who the Republicans will put up next time. The question is who will the Democrats put up? And there's a chance it can be an equally charming figure and who appeals to in a populist way, in some way where it's like, oh my gosh, like there's a celebrity worship of that person. It's very possible. They saw what happened here. They saw Kamala, she didn't want to go on Joe Rogan. She didn't want to talk to men. They didn't want to acknowledge anything in regards to that. So maybe somewhere in the Democrat side is the understanding of we have to appeal to men somehow. If Trump in his term
Well,
here,
you saw them do that. Toward the end of the campaign, they
yeah,
seemed to be getting this sort of tacit awareness that maybe was something wrong with the world of men. So
yeah,
they sent Tim Waltz out to the world to prove he doesn't know how to load a shotgun, and in order to try to appeal to men, it was actually quite comical
I
watching this happen.
I think after Trump starts going on Aiden Ross and doing this, and I'm then they start thinking, oh crap, this isn't working. It sounds like they're probably counting more on women to come help them. And I don't even think the voter turnout, I have to look at the numbers again, but I don't think the voter turnout even on the Democrat side was that high. They're probably upset for other reasons. I think they probably tried at the end, but for this election, it was going to be way too late unless they offer some kind of platform. I think it depends on what Trump does here. If Trump uses this 4 years and it turns things around and it helps men in some way that's palpable and that the average guy can feel in some way, that would be good. But if this 4 years goes by and it's much the same, then when it comes to politics, I think it's kind of anybody's game on that. So, well, here's hoping. I want to be positive about Trump. I think, he does mean well in a lot of ways. I think he's doing a decent enough job so far. He came in pretty strong with these executive orders. I'm sure a lot of them will be challenged. I'm interested to see how the tariffs and stuff like that work out. We're probably going to be paying a little more for things, but hey, that's okay if in the long run it's good. The birthright citizenship thing, every country has the right to determine how immigration and how citizenship is going to work within its borders. So I think he has the right to do that. The second thing is, with this H-1B, and we're living in a world of globalization, and that's the toughest part for everybody here, is trying to change over to that. So unfortunately, the answer is we can't just go back to how things were, which is what Tradcons try to sell, even though their idea of what things were isn't even what things were. Just right off rip. That's dead in the water. But we really have to find some kind of new path forward. We have to be creative in our thinking. This is why I like to think about, men's rights as separate from this kind of pushback to something in the past, but something that at least gives men a leg to stand on now. Men remembering what their negotiating leverage used to be, and starting to use that, and maybe even a different understanding of masculinity than the one that's currently being used now to shame men back into these roles that really don't even exist in the same way anymore.
I was thinking that if he delivers on the economy,
Mhm.
in a 4 year period, if he actually delivers on that and does some of his better efforts for civil liberties, to keep the censorship down and the a little more free speech alive, probably lock in Republicans for a while. But I don't see men's issues getting anywhere out
That's
of that.
interesting. Even with the digital free speech, because the way I see
Yeah,
it is, it would enable men to at least be way more vocal about it.
well, yeah, I mean, that will happen. Men will talk more, but in the end, we still have men that treat themselves like a race of lemmings, ready to run off the edge of a cliff in order to gain female approval. That sort of helpless gynocentrism, which has been woven into the male mind over the past 50 or 60 years, especially with feminism, that's a hell of a hurdle to overcome, I think.
It is. I think you're right there, and a lot of men really do injure themselves in a lot of ways. I mean, I've seen guys do this just working at child support, and it's just like, congratulations, you are now baby daddy number 3, and you were perfectly fine before this. It's the kid's not even a year old, and it's over, and she's now getting a third child support order for you to pay from your decent job that you had, but you made a very bad decision here. You fell into it. You let the love rule that. Love might not even have anything to do with shouldn't even have anything to do with negotiating marriage as far as that goes. And if you're going to do that, make sure she's bringing something of value to it. So when the split does happen, love tends to kind of evaporate after some time. It seems like for a lot of these marriages that end in divorce, 5 to 7 years.
I don't see men ever developing the mindset of expecting women to bring value to marriage
Mhm.
until after we've had some sort of economic collapse. And
Yeah.
I mean a serious,
Yeah.
serious social and economic collapse where we literally have to rise out of the ashes and rethink everything. I just don't see it happening until then.
I I can't argue with that, and I think there's very much wisdom in what you're saying, and I might not even want to admit it, but I do have to admit that you're right about that, and we see tinges of this now. I mean, in the society we're living in, it's very hard for people to secure that, especially for men, to secure that job that's going to pay for a household. It's hard to get a household for a family. We're hitting very hard economic times now. I personally, and I said it before, I don't think Trump can turn it around that much. Maybe he can, but it doesn't seem that way. I think where we've been riding on a very long wave of economic prosperity that was almost unnatural. I mean,
Yeah,
what the United States is a probably one of the biggest, most powerful, richest civilizations that's ever existed on the face of the planet. And you're coming out of World War II with a global uh, hegemony, just one sort of unipolar power exercising dominance and economic might over the whole place. And there's been a kind of slow unwinding, and we're at a place where we're maybe looking towards a multipolar geopolitical situation in a globalized world where it has changed the economics of this just considerably. And the people who survive out of this or families, I always have the suspicion that rich families are still kind of practicing marriage transactions in secret. You just don't hear about it. You know what I mean? Intergenerational wealth is so tough in where we live now because there's so much incentive for the family to get destroyed from the welfare state. The family court juices the nest egg. I used to see this all the time because I'd read how much the attorney's fees were. I just read, what they had in savings. A little, the little junior's college nest egg here, or whatever they were going to use that for. Little, Teresa's dowry fund, if they were ever going to do that. All that just goes away. So you just kind of end up in this situation where there is no inheritance waiting for you. Uh, and I don't know, somehow families that are able to kind of hold on to that I'm sure their marriage practices would be relatively interesting. But the weak point for them is that our family law system has been corrupted so much, it's basically become an extension of the welfare state. That's
Yes.
really what happened. And I had an interview with Pearl, and I explained to her how public family law essentially was expanded, especially through the mid 90s, and how this changed private family law, which is where normal middle class families used to go to handle difficulties. And this welfare monstrosity of a system has just destroyed so many families, and it's not even helping the people it was meant to help. It literally encroaches onto people who are doing good for society. If you're a productive citizen, the welfare family public family law system will come after you to punish you for things you never did. You know what I mean? To punish
Absolutely
you for
right.
being successful. You're successful, let's screw you over somehow. It sounds so negative, but I see it that way. I mean, I worked there for so long and saw it that way.
It's pragmatic, and I think you're also right about families. We're talking about the upper 1% here. They arrange marriages.
Yeah.
Don't kid yourself. And there are rules and transactions going on behind the scenes that you don't know about. I mean, it's one thing, Hunter Biden can go out and make a baby with a stripper,
Hmm.
but nobody named DuPont is going to do that.
Yeah,
Is it
exactly.
a different world that we're living in?
Yeah, and that's funny because there's this conversation about old money and new money. And as you see class mobility, new money comes up and enters a certain class, but they don't know how to handle themselves when they're up there. And that's how you get, the NFL player or whoever that takes a very bad deal in a woman and ends up getting ran through by the family court system. And some of these people more than once they don't understand how it works because they're operating off of romantic love and these kinds of things. But I think the people that maybe have a best chance of navigating the tumultuous situation will probably be going through the turbulence that's coming forward are people that can exercise some semblance of some of the wisdom that's in our lost history of marriage transactions and how they operate.
And that would seem like a pretty good place to close for today, folks. I've been talking with Shah from the This Is Shah channel. Highly recommend you go in and subscribe to his channel, listen to the content there. It certainly piqued my interest, and I would very much like to do this again if you're willing.
Absolutely. I mean, we got so much to cover. There is just so many different things. I wanted to just just throw a bunch of stuff at you, but I know, we're limited for time. So I'll be sitting here, I'll be reading and figuring things out and hopefully
Well,
next time.
well, why don't we just make a commitment that we're going to come back and do this within a few 2, 3 weeks and finish up with everything else you got. I don't want to leave anything out.
Absolutely. I would love that. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. There's more details on this. There's child support and the monstrosity that family law is, so we can really educate people on that.
Sounds good to me. I'm looking forward to it. Once again, this is Shah. Link below. Go check this guy out, and we'll see you back here for another talk about this. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Recording stopped.
Okay, that was
Beautiful.
fun. I hated to cut short.